Hey SFA Volleyball fans, Southland Conference Volleyball fans, Greg Miller here with you with SFAVolleyBlog.net. Got a treat to start with you today. Today I get a chance to introduce you to a three-part video series on SFA head coach Debbie Humphreys. I met Debbie when I first got involved with SFA Volleyball in 1999, well before I ever began to work with the club in 2006, and it's not an understatement to say that Debbie almost single-handedly is responsible for all the opportunities that I've gotten in the volleyball world, and certainly here at SFA. She's been the biggest component of teaching me the game and allowing me just to be around the club and be a part of what's going on here at Lady Jack Volleyball. And this series is a three-part series that has over an hour of video in it, and we hope that you'll enjoy kind of looking back on maybe some things you didn't know about head coach Debbie Humphreys, who's now in her 31st year conducting the Lady Jack Volleyball squad. This first part is about her youth and her playing days. Maybe you've never heard the story of where Debbie played college volleyball, or how she got into the sport to begin with, or how she even made her way here to Stephen F. Austin. Then in the second part of this video series, we'll talk about her building up the program that now you get to witness today. What did it take to build a winner? 666 career victories as of this taping under Debbie's belt. So what did it take to build a program? And then in the final installment, what did it take to maintain a winner? It's one thing to build a program. It's another one to maintain it for 21 seasons of 20 or more wins. So sit back and enjoy this over an hour worth of total footage across three different segments. This first segment focuses on her youth and playing days, a very candid and unique look at 31-year head coach Debbie Humphreys. All right, SFA Volleyball is ready to go. They are going to be on the bus and headed to Memphis. And as kind of a preview, head coach Debbie Humphreys is here with us today. And this is the first part of several sessions where we're going to kind of get to know her by going chronologically back through time. And today's first session is over her youth and playing days. And so many of us that are fans may not know much about how Debbie got involved in volleyball in the first place. So Debbie, I mean, you and I are close to the same age, so this is brave. I'm not somebody that often talks about my youth, so thanks for being willing to sit down and chat.
Yeah, you actually probably going to make me really go back in here and think back to things I really haven't thought about in a while. So I'm anxious to hear what you've got for me.
Well, I know that in your bio you're listed as a native of Rochester, Illinois, and I remember when the Texas Rangers were in the World Series, you rooted for the Cardinals. So yeah, so explain to us a little bit about, was that where you were born? Was that where you were raised, or was most of your childhood there in Illinois?
Definitely in Illinois. I was born in a little town called Flora, Illinois, which was a couple hours from Rochester. But when I was in second grade, we moved. So we moved to Rochester. My parents still live in the same house today. So it was pretty much the one place for the majority of my childhood.
So what was it like in your childhood home? Was there a lot of athletics going on? Talk to me about only child, siblings, things like that in terms of competition in the house?
Yeah, I've got a younger brother. He's about 4 years younger than me, so we were never, unfortunately, never really close. He was just that pest of a brother that was, too young to do what I was into. And then when he got to high school, obviously at that point I was in college. But, it was small town USA. It was a graduating class of about 115 students. So it was a small town, but right outside of Springfield, which is probably comparable to a Longview or a Tyler, something like that.
So where do you attribute athletic ability? Are your parents sports fans? Were they athletic in their youth too?
Yeah, we loved sports. Everybody played sports. My parents played golf all the time. I mean, I can remember growing up in the summers, we would finish dinner real early and then we'd go to the golf course. And my brother and I would drag their clubs around for them. We'd caddy for them, pull it on the cart. And then if we were lucky and there weren't a lot of people out there, they'd let us hit a few balls or might let us putt when we got to one of the greens and things like that. So grew up doing that. As you mentioned, St. Louis, we were only 90 miles from St. Louis. So I grew up a big Cardinal fan. We would go to a lot of Cardinal games. I can remember sitting out on the back deck with Dad listening to Cardinal games on the radio, because you're talking about, no cell phones. Every game of every kind wasn't on TV yet. So if you wanted to follow your team, you either went to the game or you listened to it on the radio.
Wow. So was the golf course in Springfield? I mean, Rochester's a small town. So was the golf course close to where you grew up, or was there a drive?
No, you're driving 5 minutes. So, I mean, we're literally a suburb pretty much of Springfield. So it was a golf course that was right there by the lake. That's the side of the town we lived on. So, no, it was no trip at all to get to the golf course.
So wearing all this, when was the first time you can remember picking up a volleyball?
For volleyball, it was 7th grade. I mean, I always loved participating in sports, but at that point in time, it wasn't like it is today. Kids are in organized sports from such a crazy young age. And for us, it was never organized until 7th grade. So it was neighborhood kids out playing in the yard. That's just what you did all summer and every night when you got home from school. But once 7th grade hit, then there was organized volleyball. So that was my first exposure to volleyball. And then even though I grew up in big basketball country, there was no girls basketball at our school. So that would have been a big interest of mine as well, but we didn't have it. So it was volleyball and it was track. And you did one of them, in the fall, and you did the other one in the spring. So that's what I spent my time in high school doing.
So before you got to junior high, though, you said basketball country. Was that something, all that you talked about with kids playing outdoors? And that reminded me of my own youth. Was there constant pickup basketball games and things like that going on, too, just around the neighborhood?
Yeah, there was every sport you could imagine. I mean, we'd get the football out and throw it around, or we'd go to somebody's house. We had a pretty good basketball court at our own place and had a pretty good driveway. And then it was kick the can. It was Frisbee. It was a game called 500. It was just all the kids and whatever ball you wanted to play on that given day. And all the parents after work kind of bringing their lawn chairs together and just sitting out in the drive watching all the kids play. So it was a different time for sure.
But that sounds very familiar to me. That echoes a lot of my childhood too. So through those sort of formative years, junior high and then on into high school, kids that age always get asked, well, what do you want to be when you grow up? What was your standard answer to that?
That's a tough one, because I really don't think there was a standard answer, but fortunately I don't have to answer it because I never did grow up. I get up every day, I put my play clothes on, and I go to the gym, so I don't have an answer for you.
I have no idea what I said to people when I was going to. But, okay, so here we are, junior high volleyball. And then, the NCAA started sanctioning volleyball in 81. And that's, about the time that you would have been in high school, graduated high school, and around that time. So what was that process like? At what point did you realize, I've been playing this for 4 or 5 years organized, and I might go to college to do this?
Probably my last 2 years of high school, I really started thinking, I knew it was something I wanted to continue doing. I graduated in 82, so I was recruited under the AIAW rules. And the class right after me was recruited under NCAA rules. So what that meant for me is that my dad took me to all kinds of schools to try out. That's what you did. I mean, he drove me all around Missouri and Illinois, and we went to a ton of schools in those two places. And I got my soul crushed and my heart broken many times because I was either too small or not strong enough, or everybody, there was always a reason why these teams weren't interested, and I thought they were all making a horrible mistake, of course. So, but fortunately at a club tournament, which that wasn't a big thing, club was not like it is now. There might be a few tournaments during the season, one a month. And you didn't just have them in your town. It was girls from a lot of different towns, and you had to actually try out and make a team. And I was at a tournament in Kansas City, and that's where Texas Tech saw me, and it was one of those just weird things that fell into place.
So as that came to fruition, what was the impact on parents there? Because, I mean, you said you traveled all around Missouri. I don't know, maybe in high school you thought of yourself as potentially attending college closer to home than Lubbock, Texas. But when that happened and you made that decision that you were going to Tech, what was the family response to that?
Well, it was interesting how the decision was made. Again, we're talking about a time before computers and cell phones, okay? So I remember getting the call from Texas Tech and offering me a scholarship. And I was the only one at the house at that point in time. So there was absolutely no one to share this with. And honestly, I was like, I don't know if I want to do this or not. It's so far, well, it's just so far away. And I knew there were other places I could go play, but there probably wasn't going to be a scholarship. But I remember when my parents came home and I told them, my dad's response was, "Yippee!" You know, he was so excited. School's paid for. I thought, well, I don't have a choice. I mean, I guess I'm going to Texas Tech. So he drove me out there, 18 hours, and we looked at the school and ended up, doing that. But I mean, it was tough because it was culture shock. It was I didn't know anybody. Everything was so different, but it was a great place. It ended up being a great place to go to school, a very friendly environment, and easy to fit in quickly.
So you and I are each coming off of sending our oldest child to college. Reagan just finished her freshman year here at SFA. Will is here now. My son Jacob just finished his freshman year at ACU and is going back Friday. Looking back, who was more prepared for the freshman experience, your kids or you?
My kids. My kids are more ready because I live in this world. So I know what they need to do. I know what they can expect, and I've been able to hopefully help them throughout that process where I didn't have a clue. I don't know if I was a young freshman as well. I didn't turn 18 until I was already at school and turned 18, I think the first day we started classes. So we had been there a few weeks already for volleyball. So not only was I young, but I was so far away from home, and I mean it was rough. It was rough.
Let's talk about on the floor now at Texas Tech. What position did you settle into? Was there a change of position from high school to college? And as you look back on those playing days, what would you cite as kind of your strongest part of your game, and what would you cite as the weaker part of your game?
I was recruited as a setter, which is very funny because my hands are atrocious, and they always have been. But I had a coach tell me one time, "You're too small to play D1 unless you become a setter." So I worked and tried to become a setter, and that did get me recruited. But when I got to Tech, they realized very quickly, you are not a setter. And I'm like, well, I know that. I could have told you that up front. They said, you can either be our backup setter or you can train with the outsides. Well, I'll train with the outsides because that's what I did my whole high school career. I set a little bit in a 6'2" later on, but I was an outside. Had there been a libero at that point in time, that would have been the position for me, because the only reason I got to play outside is because I had pretty good ball control. But they just suffered through my front row game so they could have my ball control, because you were also talking about a day of no libero, so there were no free subs. You didn't have as many subs. You needed players who could play all the way around.
Wow, yeah, I've heard you say before that if we were playing in modern era with libero, that might have been where you settled in or wanted to play. One of the things all through these years of watching you coach and getting to know your staff and your players, a lot of your players really and you take pride in this, keep up with each other. On Alumni Day, we have a lot of ladies come back and share a lot of stories. Was that culture the same for you in college, or is that something that's more prominent now as you coach? Do you keep up with anybody you played with?
I do. There's a couple girls I played with. One was my pepper partner the majority of the time, and then another girl, they're both in Dallas, and they both still have strong volleyball ties, so we run into each other from time to time. And then one girl who was actually our manager when I was in college was a roommate of mine, and she's in the Houston area, so we're real good friends. So there are some people I keep up with, but honestly, when I came here, I wanted these girls to be able to have an experience that I didn't really have, that I didn't always have. You know, I have some people I keep up with, but I feel like what they have here is much, much stronger.
So let me see if I can get the calendar right. You said you graduated high school in '82, so your senior year at Texas Tech, '86?
Fall of '85, but yeah, graduated May of '86.
Okay, that answers something for me personally. I wound up on campus at Baylor in the fall of '87, and I wondered whether or not I would have seen you play. Because at that time, Baylor played in Mars McLean Gym, of course, member of the Southwest Conference that Tech was in, and I attended a few games. I can remember that gym, and I didn't know whether we overlapped by a year or not, but that last year then, fall of '85, you were all Southwest Conference. You said a minute ago you were alone when you got the call about the scholarship. Do you remember finding out that you had made all Southwest Conference team?
No.
You don't remember like where you were at or anything like that? Yeah, because I ask girls that even now, and some of them are like, I can't remember where that was, and some of them can tell you the exact story of where. So what you mentioned, you know, you at that time outsides that had ball control, a big part of it. Do you feel like that was what garnered you the honor? Was that a big offensive year for you too, or when you look back, what got you that?
It was a better offensive year, certainly, but I mean, my game is more what my coaching style is. It's just guts and grit, you know? And was a crazy competitor and still am. And it was that. And it wasn't that I brought one thing athletically. You know, I mean, I jumped okay, but there were all the kids in our gym were so much more physical than I was. And, you know, I get it now as a coach, some of the things that happened and decisions that were made. I get it looking back because I was on my ceiling. I was going to top out pretty quick, you know, where there were a lot of other kids on our team that what they would be capable of doing was so much greater than mine. But I think I was more of a glue piece. I think I was a glue type piece that allowed some of those crazy good athletes and just really good players that I played with, allowed them to go do their thing because I was a little steadier. I wasn't going to light it up usually, but I do remember my last match, though, lighting it up. It seemed like everything. I was not usually the person to set, but I do remember that night everything I touched turned to gold. But it was just heart and guts and grit.
Let's rule out current players for the answer to this question. Has there ever been a player come along through the ranks at SFA where when you were done you thought, she was like me?
There's been bits and pieces of different players. I mean, because I played with a chip on my shoulder, and I always had something to prove. That was just because too many people had told me, you're too small, you're too weak, you're too this. So I played that way. Katie Randall played that way for sure. She played with a chip on her shoulder every time she stepped out on the court. O.J. Olson played a little bit like that too. Those kids that just played hard, left their heart and soul out there, and just gritted it, you know, gutted it out. Those are the players I can really relate to.
So when you got to your senior year, you have 2 degrees from Texas Tech. Talk about the process. Was that one of those where, well, I really want to do this? Oh, I don't know what I'm going to do, so I'm going to stay here. What was the process of staying for graduate school?
Well, that's an easy one. There was no process. I've graduated. I'm holding a diploma in my hand going, what in the world am I going to do? I have no idea. Well, I'm going to buy myself 2 more years. I'm going to go to grad school.
So eventually the Lubbock era had to end, okay? So we talked about you really didn't have an answer to what you wanted to be when you grew up. You can't really, but at that point, okay, after the master's degree, that final semester maybe, and you're realizing, I can't pull that trick again or else I'm going to have to go get a PhD somewhere else or something. Was coaching in the picture right then? Did you thought during those last couple years this might be something I might want to try?
It's one of those things where I think what I always wondered, I didn't really view it as a career for me necessarily, but I always wondered from playing for all different coaches, whether it was high school, volleyball, track, or college volleyball, and even club. Playing for these different coaches, the pieces that I really liked from each coach did, because there's stuff that every player, it doesn't matter who the coach is, there are things those players like and there's things they don't, and it's different for every player. But for me, it was about, I would really like to take all these positives and try to weed out the negatives and see what happens. I viewed it as a challenge for sure, and just kind of see what happens. But I knew that high school coaching was not what I needed to do. I would not do well, and all my assistants have told me, oh my gosh, you'd last a day or two at the high school level and I'd be fired and out the door. But it's just, that's not for me. I'm too intense for that. But it was going to have to be college coaching. But grad school, I worked in cardiac rehab. I worked at a hospital in cardiac rehab, and that I enjoyed that, but that experience made me realize how much I wanted to work with athletes. So I wanted to give it a try. So I started throwing my name out there, every assistant job that was open, and wasn't getting, much interest. I did have some calls, we're interested in looking at you, and, nothing really came of it. And I saw the SFA job, which was a head job, and I'm thinking, no one in the right mind is going to hire a 23-year-old right out of school. And I almost didn't apply. But it was a combination. I'm convinced to this day this is why I'm doing what I'm doing. So definitely God had a plan. But the position was 50% coaching, 50% teaching. And the teaching responsibility was swimming. And I spent every summer in school, in college, lifeguarding and teaching swim lessons. So I had done that. So I had all my certifications that were needed for that. And I'm convinced to this day that that's why I got this job.
I don't think I'd ever heard that before, and that kind of segues us out of this session. So there was no, after master's degree, there was no gainful employment between end of master's degree and being hired as the head coach of SFA Volleyball.
I finished my master's degree in May of 88, I guess it was, May of 88, and I started here at SFA that summer. And I'm still here, and I'm honestly very thankful to Sadie Allison and Carl Kite for giving me an opportunity.
Well, that's the segue. The next time we sit down and chat, we'll talk about those early years, what it took to build a successful program. It's one thing to build it, another thing to maintain it. And so the next time we sit and chat, we'll talk to you about your strategy of how to build this monster that's now gone on for 31 years. Thanks, Debbie, for the time.
All right, you bet.